Our learning is Leila Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven her Neshama Shem Aliyah. The last thing we discussed was Shmuel, who came along with this view that a liquid that is extracted from a food that goes directly into another food is not considered a beverage. Okay, so this has ramifications for the laws of Shabbos, because on Shabbos there's a prohibition called mefarek, where we are extracting liquid from a solid, and Shmuel is coming along and saying that if it doesn't have the status of a beverage because it immediately goes into another solid, then you never were in violation of extraction. Parenthetically, this is the way we pass, and this is the way we rule. Now, it's going to have ramifications for the laws of tumah, of impurity as well, because when it comes to laws of purity and impurity, there is a concept that for something to be huchshir l'tumah, something to be susceptible to tumah, to impurity, it has to first come into contact with a beverage, with a, not just a liquid, but a beverage, something that was considered a beverage. So if we have a liquid that is coming out of a solid and enters into another solid, so according to Shmuel, the same principle should apply, and if it's going directly into another solid, it should not be considered a beverage, in which case it should not be able to facilitate, to trigger something's susceptibility to tumah. Okay, hope that made sense. So here we go. So the Gemara is going to question Shmuel's principle based on some discussions about Tumah. So Masiv Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama challenged Shmuel's idea based on the following Mishnah. Zav shechole v'sa'ez hachalev tameh. If a zav is someone who is tameh, milks a goat, the milk is tameh. Now this Mishnah does not differentiate between whether the milk goes into a solid or it goes into just falls into a regular bucket and falls out as a liquid, okay? And if you want to tell me that a beverage, like a liquid that comes out of a solid, that goes into a solid, goes into food, is considered as food, it's not considered a beverage. But ma'is kasher, the milk that comes out in that scenario, where that milk is now going straight into a solid, why does the Mishnah say that the milk is tameh? What caused the milk to be able to become tameh? It first had to come into contact with something called a liquid. This milk is not called a liquid. It's called food. It's not called a liquid because it never stood alone as a liquid. So the Gemara answers, Rav Yochanan said in regards to something else, regarding a tameh woman, we're talking about, so Rav Yochanan was talking about a woman and the milk that comes out while she is nursing. So to answer a question there, he said that she took a little bit of milk, and sometimes to facilitate the nursing, a woman will take a little bit of milk and put it on her nipple in order to cause the baby to drink from it, and that liquid is not going into a solid. That liquid is standalone. That's certainly a beverage. So we're talking about a drop of milk that the owner takes and smears on the opening of the goat's nipple in order to facilitate the milk coming out, and there, that liquid is not going into a solid. Its liquid stands alone. It's liquid which therefore will classify as a beverage, and that's how we answer the question. Okay, and that's why the milk is susceptible to tumah, and we no longer have a question on Shmuel. However, we have another question on Shmuel. Someone who is contaminated by coming into contact with a corpse, and they squeeze olives or grapes, okay? If the olives or grapes that are squeezed are exactly the size of an egg, so the fruit is going to become tameh, but the liquid that comes out is not going to become tameh. Why? Because immediately when it comes out of the fruit is going to be less than a beitzah, less than the size of an egg, and therefore it's not able to transfer tumah. Okay, that's the principle. Okay, but what comes out is hayoser mika beitzah tameh. In a situation where there is more, when the fruits, let's say the orange, is larger than an egg. Okay, so your typical orange is larger than an egg, and you're going to squeeze it. The implication is then it will become tameh, or it'll be contaminated by the liquid that comes out. But if you say that beverage that's extracted from food is regarded as food, b'ma'is kasher, again, it's basically the same question. What caused the liquid that comes out to be considered, where's the liquid over there? Why do we treat it as liquid? Because presumably this Mishnah, again, by not distinguishing, is talking about a case where it goes into a solid or a liquid, or it goes into like a bowl. And therefore, according to Shmuel's principle, how do you understand this Mishnah? So the Gemara answers very simply, who most of them farikla. We have to be talking about a case where a person squeezes it into a bowl and not into a solid, and therefore there's no question. The whole question is based on a premise that the Mishnah is not distinguishing between when it's going into a solid, i.e. like a piece of bread, a piece of meat, or whatever it is, and seems to say still that we're going to treat it as a beverage. So we say the way to answer that is to say that this Mishnah, even though it doesn't say explicitly, is only talking about a case where a person is squeezing it into a bowl and not into a solid, and therefore we have no question on Shmuel. Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Kitanai. This principle of Shmuel is the subject of a Tanaic dispute. Again, Shmuel is an Amora, so that comes down from the year 250 or so and on to the year 500 or so, and he's one of the earlier Amoraim, I should mention. So, but by saying it's a time, we're saying that it goes back to the earlier generations of the authors of the Mishnah. And he's going to attempt to show that this point of Shmuel is actually a matter of debate between two Tanaim. So what's the discussion? Hamachlik ba'anavim. If a baker rubs his loaves with grapes, okay, so the juice will give him a shiny crust. Okay, so nowadays we take like eggs and put it on top of bread. So similarly, they're going to take grapes and smear it, basically push the grapes against the bread to give it a shine. Lo huchshar, the grapes do not become susceptible to tumah, even though juice came out and it touched the grapes. Nonetheless, it doesn't cause it to become susceptible to tumah. Why would that be? Seemingly because of the rule of Shmuel. Because Shmuel holds that liquid that comes forth from a solid and goes back into a solid. Over here, it's going from the grapes into the bread. We don't consider that to be a beverage. We consider it to be food. And therefore, this first opinion in this Mishnah would seem to be going like Shmuel, who holds, again, liquid that comes out of a solid and goes into a solid is treated as a solid and not as a beverage. However, Yehuda disagrees and says, Hochshar, it does become susceptible to tumah. So, Ma'ila b'hak mifli, are they not arguing about the following? That Mar Sava Mashka Bala Ochel Hu, that the first opinion, the Tanakama in this discussion, holds that liquid that comes from food and goes into food is considered food, and that's why the liquid that comes from the grapes that goes into the challah, into the bread, is considered like food. And Rabbi Yehuda holds it is not food. Rav Papa disagrees. He says no. Tekuli ama mashka, and there's another way of understanding this machlokas. And he says tekuli ama mashka habala ochel lav ochelhu. Maybe both Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda hold that beverages that are extracted from food is not regarded as food. It's considered like liquid, not like Shmuel. What they're disagreeing about is this particular case where liquid that is extracted, that is you plan on discarding, that is what they're arguing about. The mar savar mashkahu, even though you plan on discarding it, it's still going to be considered a beverage. Okay, so what how does that relate to our case? Because the case of the grapes is basically you squeeze the grapes on top of the bread, and it gives it a little bit of like a shine, but it's going to burn away immediately when it goes into the oven. So basically, you're squeezing something out, and it's going to be destroyed. So the first opinion holds that, the second opinion holds that a beverage that's going to be discarded, is considered a beverage, and therefore he holds that it is hochshlutum, we treat it as a liquid. Umar Savar, the Tanakama, holds la mashkahu, it's not a beverage, and that's what's going on over here, and they're not discussing at all Shmuel's halacha. And so right now, based on the way Rav Papa's understanding, there is no source for Shmuel's halacha, because he's saying you could read this brisa to say that both opinions disagree with Shmuel. And then Rav Papa continues and says, Uplukta Dahani Tanai, and this disagreement between Tanakh and Yehuda is bound up in another dispute of Tanaim. Why? Where? The Tanaim is taught in a brisa. So a person bruises olives with unclean hands. Okay, so if a person doesn't have their hands clean, then their hands are going to transfer tumah. Okay, and they go ahead and they're crushing olives. So hochshar, they become susceptible to tumah through the contact of the oil that drips out of the olives. Lisof san b'melech, if a person's crushing them, like pushing them in order to dip them into salt. In other words, if you want to dip your olives into salt, you want your olives to be a little bit mushy so that the salt will kind of like stick to them. So there, you don't care about the oil that's coming out of it. The oil is going to go to the garbage. The point is you're just trying to make it a little more mushy so that the salt will be able to stick to the olive. Lo huchshar. So the Tanakhama says they do not become susceptible to the liquid that comes out is unimportant, right? This seemingly is going, the Rav Papa is arguing that this is because he holds that that's a mashke, it's a beverage that's going out, that's going to be destroyed, it's meaningless, I'm going to get rid of it. Therefore, it's not considered a beverage. Similarly, if a person is bruising them, in other words, hitting them, in order to see whether or not the olives are at the appropriate stage, so it's just a way of testing them, you don't care about the liquid. Lo huchshar, again, they do not become susceptible. Yehuda disagrees and says huchshar, they do, because they are susceptible to tumah through contact with the oil that drips from them. My lab, what are they arguing about? Rabbi Yehuda holds that a beverage that is meant to be discarded is regarded as a beverage, and therefore, even though the liquid coming out over here is going to be discarded, it's still a beverage. And the Tanakhama holds it is not considered a beverage. Okay, Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua disagrees with Rav Papa's understanding of the first case. He says you thought they were arguing about this discussion about le'ibud, when it goes to destruction. Really, they're arguing about something else. They're arguing about this last brisa, the brisa of the olives. They're arguing about mashka omer liibud. They're arguing about liquid that's going to be destroyed. But in the case of the bread, they're arguing about how do you treat beverages that are being used for making a shine. In other words, it's a more limited machlokas. It's not about because it's going to be destroyed. It's more, do you treat beverages that are coming out, do you treat them as... do you treat them like they're coming out to create a sheen, like a shine? Do we treat that as a beverage, or do we treat it as nothing, right? And so therefore, they aren't. Rav Papa wanted to say that the Bryce and the Mishnah are talking about the same thing. He says no. One of them is talking about when the liquid is going to be destroyed. That's one machlokas, and then another machlokas about how do you treat liquids that are going to be created as a shine. One says that is considered a beverage. One says it is not. So then we have similar to what Shmuel said, or identical to what Shmuel said, that when you squeeze into a pot of food, we do not treat that as a beverage. That's exactly what now we have a statement ultimately coming from Rav. Rav is a contemporary of Shmuel, and he says a person's allowed to squeeze a cluster of grapes into a pot of food on Shabbos, but not into a bowl, meaning you can't put it into a standalone bowl. You can't just have the liquid come out, but you can have the liquid be squeezed out into a food item. A fish is allowed to be squeezed for its brine, even to a bowl. We do not consider fish brine to be a food unto itself. Okay, Yasser Rav Dimi was sitting and repeated this teaching that we just saw in the name of Rav. That you're allowed to squeeze fruits into a food. You're not allowed to squeeze it into a bowl, and you are allowed to squeeze fish for the brine that comes out, to get the brine out. Amalei Abai Rav Dimi. Rav Abai was there, and he said to Rav Dimi, you teach this ruling in the name of Rav, and therefore there's no challenge. We teach this ruling in the name of Shmuel, and therefore we have a difficulty. What's the difficulty? Did Shmuel really say that a fish is allowed to be squeezed for its brine into a bowl? Va'itmar was taught the following: squeezing a pickled vegetables. Amarav legufan. If you're squeezing pickled vegetables for themselves, in order to make them ready to eat, you want to get the juices out of them. No problem. If you're squeezing them out to get the liquid from them, it's forbidden rabbinically. Shlakos, regarding boiled vegetables, bein legufan, bein lemeim, whether you're squeezing them out because for themselves or for their liquid, mutter, we don't consider the liquid to be fine. We don't consider the liquid to be, getting something else out of it. We treat it just like it's the vegetable. It's just like vegetable juice. We don't treat it like a beverage, okay? With Shmuel Amar, however, Shmuel says, whether it's pickled or boiled vegetables, the gufan mutter, if you're squeezing them for themselves, meaning so you can eat them, it's permitted. But if you're squeezing them out for their liquid, it's forbidden rabbinically. So how is a boiled vegetable that you're squeezing out for its liquid, how is that different than a fish and its brine? It's the same thing. And yet over here Shmuel says you can't squeeze out a vegetable for its liquid, it's rabbinically forbidden. And yet earlier, and we just saw, according to this version we just saw a moment ago, Abaya's version, he says you are allowed to squeeze out a fish for its brine. So how do you reconcile this? Amarle, Rav Dimi says we don't reconcile. Halakim, by God. Einai Rav Lozar, he quotes a pasuk that says, my eyes saw it and not a stranger. In other words, he's saying, I saw this, I know this for a fact. What is that? Mipumid Rav Yirmiyah Shmili. Rav Dimi says, I heard the following from Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Yirmiyah Rav Zera. Rav Yirmiyah, my teacher, heard it directly from Rav Zera. Rav Zera Rav Chia Bar Ashi. Rav Zera heard it from his teacher, Chia Bar Ashi. Rav Chia Bar Ashi may Rav. Rav Chia Bar Ashi heard it from Rav. In other words, this teaching about the fish and its brine, this was never taught from Shmuel. It was only taught from Rav. And therefore, there's no problem of contradiction because Shmuel never said it. It was always a teaching from Rav. Okay, now we go back to this question about squeezing pickled or boiled vegetables. Gufa, text, we said earlier, kvashim sheschatan, squeezing a pickled vegetables. Amarav legufan, if you're doing it for themselves in order to be able to eat them, mutter, it's allowed. Lememain, if you're doing it to squeeze it out so you can have the liquid that comes out of it, pantav it's rabbinically forbidden. Shlakos, boiled vegetables, ben legufan meim, whether you're doing it for themselves or for their liquid, mutter, it is permitted to do so. Shmuel amar echadzeh vechadzeh, this one or that one, both pickled and boiled vegetables, the gufan mutter, if you're squeezing them for themselves, it's permitted. Lememain, pantav if you're doing it for the liquids, not only by pickled vegetables, but also by boiled vegetables. If you're doing it for the liquid, it is rabbinically forbidden. He says both pickled and boiled vegetables, if you're doing it for themselves to get the liquid out so you can eat them, it's permitted. But if you're squeezing them out, even the boiled vegetables or the pickled vegetables, to be able to, for the liquid, you're chayav v'chatas, meaning it's biblically forbidden. Meisvei, the challenge on all three opinions. Why? Bryce says like this: Sochatin, kavashim, b'Shabbos, derech Shabbos. You got to squeeze pickled vegetables on Shabbos for use on Shabbos. We can't do it for Matzah Shabbos. Okay, but notice the Brisa says you're allowed to squeeze pickled vegetables on Shabbos. It doesn't differentiate, right? Okay, then the Brisa continues, navim, and olives or grapes, you're not allowed to squeeze them out on Shabbos. If you squeeze them out, chayav chatas, you are going to be chayav chatas. Kash l'Rav, kash l'Shmuel, kash l'Rav Yochanan. This Brisa is a question on all three opinions. Rav matarz to so the Gemara says, Rav matarz to me, Shmuel matarz to me, Rav Yochanan matarz to me. Each one answers it according to their own opinion. Let's see. Rav matarz to me. Rav resolves the difficulty by amending the Brisa to read like this: Sochatin kavashim Shabbos derech Shabbos lo tzom Shabbos. You're allowed to squeeze pickled vegetables on Shabbos for use on Shabbos, but not for the use for after Shabbos. In other words, you can't do hachana, you can't prepare on Shabbos for after Shabbos. But medvar murim, but then he adds the following concept of the following words. One of these words said legufan when it's being done for themselves. Well, man, if you're doing it for their liquids, patul asr is rabbinically forbidden. Shlakos, when it comes to boiled vegetables, ben legufan ben lemeim mutar. Whether you're squeezing them for themselves, you can eat them, or whether you're squeezing it for their juice, it's permitted to do so. When it comes to olives or grapes, lo yitzchot, you can't squeeze them. V'msachtan chayiv chatas. If you did squeeze them, you were chayiv a carbon chatas. Shmuel mutar tzamei. Shmuel also answers it according to his way of understanding. Sochlam mikvash m'shabbos derech Shabbos. Got to squeeze pickled vegetables on Shabbos for the use on Shabbos. Hu adin l'shlakos, and the same would be true for boiled vegetables. However, men varmur, when it's a solo gufan, when it's for themselves, v'lemen, if it's for their liquids, patul asr, it's rabbinically prohibited. When it comes to olives or grapes, you can't squeeze them. You did squeeze them, you're chayiv chatas. And then Rav Yochanan answers it according to his reasoning as well. You're allowed to squeeze pickled vegetables on Shabbos for use on Shabbos, but not for use after Shabbos. Whether they are pickled or boiled. When is that sola gufan? When it's for themselves, if you're doing it for the liquid, you can't do so. Now here, it's a little more tricky for Rav Yochanan, because Rav Yochanan, remember, he holds that if you squeeze out a vegetable, whether for its liquid, any type of vegetable, not only are you rabbinically prohibited, it's biblically prohibited. The problem is the brisa we just quoted said only zeisim anavim, only olives and grapes are biblically prohibited. So the way he reads the brisa now says, Vimsachad, if you did squeeze a regular vegetable, boiled or pickled for its liquid, nasa, he reads the following words, nasa kimisha sachat zeisim anavim v'chayiv chatas. It's like you squeezed olives and grapes, meaning it's like the one that everyone agrees about, and therefore you're chayiv chatas. Okay, the basic bottom line is everyone's able to read this brisa according to their own way of reading it. Bottom line is halacha l'maisa, practically speaking, we do rule that you are allowed to squeeze a fruit into a solid. So you're allowed to squeeze, again, let's say a lemon or grapes into a solid, and that is okay on Shabbos. Okay, we'll pick up from here. Have a great day.